All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Schneider of Variety. Thank you so much for coming out. We have a special treat for you tonight. You just saw live in front of a studio audience featuring the works of Norman Lear's All in the Family and The Jeffersons. Yeah? Now let's have a conversation with the legend behind it. And first up, I'm going to introduce Brent Miller, who is the head of production and development for Mr. Norman Lear's production company, Act 3. Brent, come on up.
I am not the legend.
And then, of course, this man needs no introduction, the legend of television himself, Mr. Norman Lear.
Thank you.
Mr. Lear just celebrated a birthday recently.
Don't tell him.
We'll keep it a secret. But nonetheless, happy belated birthday. And also...
97.
97.
Yes.
And also the big news that we just received the other day from ABC is that they picked up not one, but 2 more editions of Live in Front of a Studio Audience.
Which I have to interrupt to say was entirely Jimmy Kimmel's idea, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And the fact that not only did everyone pull it off, but it exceeded, I imagine, expectations. I mean, Mr. Lear, talk about sort of what you expected out of this and how it sort of lived up to your wildest dreams.
Well, it started living up to it when I walked in the first time, days before we shot it, and saw the sets. To see the set of All in the Family again, my God, it was dear. And then to go into rehearsals with the likes of the actors who were new in the roles and so forth. I mean, it was just one of the great treats. And the same thing with the Jeffersons and all of those people.
Yeah, that was...
You got a microphone?
Right here.
And how did you feel about it?
I felt the same. Obviously didn't have but my emotional reaction came from watching him see the set for the first time, because we walked over from our office and I was so excited because Bernie Visga, who is also nominated for an Emmy this year as our production designer, he found the original plans from 1970 and absolutely, I mean, piece by piece, those sets were exactly the same as they were. So when we walked over, I couldn't wait to see his reaction, which, as you can imagine, was spiritual.
Yeah. And not only that, but to see them, and I had the opportunity to go to one of the dress rehearsals, so I got to see it in the audience, to see them right next to each other. These two memories from my childhood, seeing these living rooms in front of my face, back to back, was incredible. How tough was it, do you know, to find those pieces and to recreate that world?
You'd have to ask Bernie about that.
Yeah.
I mean, he is just brilliant. And the only thing that was different on the All in the Family set was there was a picture of a 4-year-old kid. It's hard to describe where it was placed, but it was fairly prominent.
Right next to the stairs.
Right next to And it was a picture of me when I was 4 years old. And it's hard to imagine that I was once 4 years old.
That's a nice touch, though. That's a nice touch. So take me back to when Jimmy Kimmel came to you and said, I want to do this. What did you think? And what was the idea when he approached the two of you?
Well, actually, he approached Brent first.
You know, we have been collectively approached many times about, especially after the success of One Day at a Time, people were saying, when are you going to do All in the Family? When are you going to do Maude? When are you going to do Jeffersons? And Norman had made a decision. I mean, he really didn't want to touch those shows at the time until Jimmy came up with the idea that said, we we want to touch them, but we don't want to really touch them. We want to honor them. And so we want to do the exact same scripts that were written in the 70s. And that's ultimately what we ended up doing. And
Yeah, word for word, each of those pieces were exactly what we did in the 70s.
Yeah, and Norman, you actually had to tape a sort of disclaimer because obviously TV standards are different now. And interestingly enough, there's certain things you can't say now that maybe you could have in the 1970s.
You couldn't say then, but we made it through.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't begin to understand. It wasn't anything we ever did in any show that wasn't spoken in a schoolyard or a doctor's office, a waiting room, or any place in America. And yet, program practices / censors were there all the time.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, but you never used any of that in a cavalier fashion. I mean, there was always a point to,
Yeah.
tackling subjects, using certain words, using certain discussions in these shows.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the episodes that you chose. I know there was a flow to them, obviously, in the introduction of the Jeffersons, but how did you zero in on these episodes?
Well, the All in the Family introduced George Jefferson at the conclusion, so it was natural, since we were doing the two shows, to look at the episode that introduced George at the end of the episode, the All in the Family episode, because that was a clear way into the Jeffersons, and it was an awfully good show. So we said, let's make this.
And I was struck by, obviously, just switch out the names of, the president, for example, switch out some things, but it's as topical and felt as timely now. A lot of groans from the audience, yeah. I mean, you notice that too, that it's striking how relevant these shows still are all these years later.
Well, the problems are still with us. There's nothing that... There's no problem that a family faced in the 70s that families are not facing today. It's all that we're human beings. We don't change that much.
What did you think of the idea of doing this live? That was an added sort of level of, made it a big event, but it also kind of kept everyone on their toes.
I love that. And I love Kimmel for thinking of that and having the guts to do it, because basically this was what he brought to the network, not what we brought.
And Brent, take me through sort of the process once you signed on and you started working with Jimmy. What was it like? What were some of the challenges in making this happen?
Well, after a little while, I didn't like him at all.
Strife on set.
It was interesting because this is something that really hadn't been done before. So on the Sony side, on the ABC side, on our side, so it was something that we were learning as we were going, and we were going fast. But what was interesting, and you brought up the scripts and the dialogue, there was a lot of conversation because the Jefferson script, the use of the N-word, was we didn't take that lightly, and as you said, Norman did his disclaimer in the beginning of the show, but we had a conversation with the African-American cast as a whole, multiple conversations about whether the word would be said, whether we would rewrite that word, whether we would bleep it. It was an active conversation that went day after day after day until finally, collectively, everybody decided we want him to say it. He's saying it because he's honoring exactly what the words were in the 70s. That's what we've all decided to do. We all signed up for that. But we want it bleeped. And that was very, very specific on their end. And, of course, we respect and honored that and ultimately asked the network if we could control it. So we controlled it, I should say. Jimmy Burrows and his team controlled it from the back room when it was coming time for that specific scene. that involved many rehearsals, by the way, because Jamie can be a wild card.
as we saw in the actual live presentation.
As we saw.
Yeah.
Which was great, by the way, because I think ultimately it let everybody feel like they were part of the evening, at home and in the audience.
Yeah. Well, and it seemed like like let the air out a little bit. Everyone was a little more comfortable after the Jamie Foxx moment, and you kind of want something like that, right?
I think when he forgot his line, I say that in quotes. I think it was deliberate.
He knew he needed to sprinkle a little spice on top,
and a way of reminding the audience it was really live.
Yeah. I think that was good because, again, I mentioned that I went to one of the dress rehearsals where it was almost too clean. It was like everyone knew their lines. It was almost too perfect. So if you're doing a live show, you want the little edge, right? So let's talk about that cast. So speak of, look at who you got to do this. Woody Harrelson, Marisa Tomei, Jamie Foxx, Wanda Sykes. By the way, Wanda Sykes and Marisa Tomei, I think, were the MVPs. I mean, they were incredible.
They were great.
Right?
They were great.
But talk about lining up this cast and what the process was and getting people on board to do something that no one had ever done before.
Well, it started with Woody. You tell them your story.
Well, I fell altogether in love with Woody, the talent, the actor. When he did LBJ on a special, Woody Harrelson playing Lyndon Baines Johnson, it's just impossible. But he was so brilliant. And I never forgot that. And thought when we had to do the Carol O'Connor role, Archie Bunker, I got to try Woody Harrelson. And he didn't attempt to do Carol O'Connor. He did his Archie Bunker, and I thought he was wonderful.
Yeah.
And she, of course, she was so good that I didn't even think of it as an imitation. Or trying to sound like Edith Bunker. She was Edith Bunker.
Yeah, and I talked to her a week or two later, and she said the thing she was terrified about the most was singing the theme song and doing that live. But they both pulled it off. That's not an easy song. I mean, you have to hit it right. It can't be perfect, but you got to sort of do it. It's still got to be good. So that was amazing. And then Jamie Foxx, how'd he come about?
His mother met his father.
We're good.
And I assume they cohabited at some point.
Touche. We're going way back.
That's how we came about. I don't know.
And then years later,
thought him instantly for the role.
It was a collective decision. It started with Woody, and then from Woody came Marisa, and then we explored Jeffersons, and collectively we're all like, Jamie Foxx would kill this if he's willing to do it. And Jimmy reached out to him, and immediately he was like, I'm in. He may have said something else, but he was in.
Yeah. So he was in, and then again, Wanda Sykes as Wheezy.
Oh,
right? I mean,
she nailed it. She really did. She was so good. How many of you have seen her special, by the way, on Netflix? If you haven't, do yourself a favor because it's brilliant. It really is. She's so good.
Yeah. So they were great on the top line, but then you got some amazing people, Will Ferrell, I mean, the list goes on, to kind of do these fun sort of secondary roles as well. So it sounds like once the word got out, people were starting to really want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And obviously Jimmy called a few favors as well, and then Jimmy Burrows directing the whole thing. So you also have a director who's
James Burrows. For those who may not remember or didn't know, he was the comedy director of the 70s and 80s and so forth. The longtime director of Cheers. I think he did 90% of all Cheers, and just brilliant comedy director. So we had him, and he brought a lot to it also.
Yeah. So you got royalty all around. But then my other favorite thing, Marla Gibbs. to get Marla Gibbs to be the surprise who shows up and playing Florence once again. Did not miss it at all. Like, she got it, and I remember even like she said afterwards, like she still remembered all the lines from that first episode.
And the blocking. She even knew the blocking. I mean, she knew it cue to cue. It was, and she, in her words, I think she said, when something like that happens to you and changes your life, you never forget it. And so she never did.
The sound the audience made when the door was opened and it revealed her, I thought I'd never heard that before. It was just of that moment. Yeah. And so, she was so loved. I never heard more love expressed in one sound.
Yeah, and then of course she has the killer line that ends the episode too. Yeah. So she even like brings it home at the very end with the overcame line. How did that come about? How did you guys reach out to Marla? How did she become involved in this?
Well, I've maintained a relationship with Marla through the years. So we've seen each other 3 times a year, each of the years, and. You just called her, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, she, as in her words, I'll do anything Norman Lear asked me to do.
Yeah.
That's what she says. And, but it was the perfect role for her to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to repeat the line you were referring to because, she's in this fancy apartment that is inhabited by a black couple. And another couple talk about are also in the building. She sees 2 couples in a building that some years before never saw a black family. And she says, I just have to ask you one question. How come we overcame and no one told me? And the way that line echoes in my head and will forever.
Yeah, and she delivers it. It's fantastic. All right, so what are you thinking for the next one? It's the question that I'm sure you're being asked nonstop. Have you identified what you're going to do next? Are you still sort of debating which shows?
We have. How much do you want to talk about it?
We can't. We can't. But we're having conversations about all of them.
Yeah.
And. But I think that we've all decided we're really excited about what the holiday special will be.
And is there a chance some of the folks who did the last one might come back, maybe in other roles, or maybe doing the same roles again? Have you sort of started to, talk about that?
Always a chance.
Always a chance. TBD. Well, we have a couple of questions from the audience. I want to quickly get to those as well, since our time, unfortunately, is short here. So one question for Mr. Lear from Laurel. Are there any actors, living or deceased, that you would love to work with, and why?
Oh, my God. My head is flooded.
Yeah, right.
With actors. When you say living and deceased, some 90% of everybody I ever worked with is deceased. Carol and Jean, and anyway, yes, of course, there are a lot of. I'd love to have worked with Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
I would love, my first evening in Los Angeles, I parked my wife and we had one small child in a cheap motel on Sunset Boulevard, and I went out. It was Saturday. I went out to get a Sunday newspaper to look for a place to live in the real estate section. And I passed a theater. I passed a little theater in El Centro called the Stage Theater. It was made out of a home. It was a 90-seat theater. But opening tonight, Shaw's Major Barbara, which was a favorite play for me. And I talked to a guy who was sweeping up or something. Anyway, he asked me if I wanted a seat. And there were 3 seats roped off in front of me. And as the lights were going down, in walked two character actors I recognize, British and Charles Chaplin. There was a Sidney Chaplin, turned out to be his son, which I didn't know in the play. I had seen it in the program. But Charles Chaplin walked in, and I didn't get to have a word with him. But if I could have talked to anybody in theater or films, perhaps it would be Charlie Chaplin.
Great answer. Wanted to, by the way, mention, because we haven't brought up One Day at a Time, which congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
That was one that was a labor of love, and it looked like it might not move forward, and it's happening. Another season of that show. So it's a very special show, and now it lives on Pop TV, and CBS is also going to be airing it. So, talk real quick about that and sort of the victory of getting another season after it looked like the show wouldn't continue.
And we got a couple of Emmy nominations.
For the special, not for One Day at a Time.
Oh,
but for One Day at a Time, Sony has been an amazing partner to us, and the fact that they, as our studio partner, were able to think outside the box and really come to a place where they could make this arrangement with Pop was huge. I mean, they never stopped believing in the show, and because they can sell anywhere, they went everywhere. And Pop is our new partner, rolled out the red carpets for us Friday at the TCAs, and we're really excited. We're going to do, I don't know if it's announced yet, but basically the beginning of 2020, we're going to be on Pop, and then the summer, CBS Primetime is going to run it again. So we have a lot of, I'm assuming a lot of new audience members that are going to fall in love with the Alvarez family. Yeah. At least that's our hope.
Oh, and that's great to have One Day at a Time back on CBS, just like in the old days.
We're coming home.
Another question for Mr. Lear from Joseph Stephen.
Joseph Stephen.
Joseph, shout out.
Where is he? Just so we all know who that is.
In the back.
Hello, Joe.
What have you not done yet in life or produced in career that you still want to?
I haven't awakened tomorrow.
That's the next big thing.
And that's what I'm looking forward to.
Me too, by the way.
The fact is, I think about this a lot. The fact is, it has taken every one of you and every one of us every split second of our lives to see me wave this finger. Did you know it's taken all your life to get to see me do this?
And I hope you keep doing that for a long time to come. One more question from Wendy, and Brent, you sort of alluded to this earlier, but in this age of TV reboots and remakes, beyond live in front of a studio audience, are you looking at any other titles to bring back? Is that something you're still looking at, maybe resurrecting?
Yes, we have been invited to think of redoing Maude.
Oh, someone wants to know who's going to do it.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to talk about that.
We're talking about all those shows right now. We have a deal at Sony, and all of Norman's library exists at Sony. So obviously that is something that they're very eager for us to explore. And some of you may not know, but his library is not just the six that everybody immediately knows him from, as far as All in the Family, Jefferson, Sanford and Son, Maude, Mary Hartman, One Day at a Time. But there's also 227, Facts of Life, Silver Spoons. All of those shows are also part of the Lear library. So there's a lot of properties for us to mine, and we're very excited about exploring all of them.
Yeah, I recently just watched the first Maude All in the Family episode. Again, another episode that completely holds up, and B. Arthur was just like another level.
Only one.
Another level. So, Mr. Lear, I wanted to ask you real quick about the legacy of your shows, and we hear a lot now about people wanting to live up to these shows, and what do you think, or what do you hope sort of the legacy is, or what these shows should be remembered for? We talk a lot about what they meant for in terms of social causes and tackling tough subjects, and also being funny. What do you hope people sort of remember and get out of some of these classic titles of yours?
Well, through the years, where All in the Family is concerned, the one expression I've heard the most, and I can't express well enough how much it has meant to me to hear, but when people have, God, thousands of times, people have told me how much they loved sitting with their fathers and laughing. Now, their whole families, but especially the father. Evidently, we Americans don't laugh enough with our parents. But people did on Saturday night, when it was on Saturday night, on Tuesday, when it was on Tuesday. And I love hearing that. Love hearing that.
Another thing that I took away from watching live in front of a studio audience is how much I loved these shows that are taped in front of a studio audience, multi-camera, that feel like plays, that we've gone away. There aren't many shows like that on TV right now, and they continue to go away. Why do you think that is? And do you think we're sort of missing out by not doing as many of these kinds of shows anymore?
Well, as a kid, I was born in New Haven, raised largely in Hartford, Connecticut. So when I was a teenager, and I loved the theater, at a certain age, I don't know, my folks allowed me to get on a train on a Saturday morning and see a matinee and come home. So I fell in love with theater early, and doing live television multi-camera is as close as you can get to doing a one-act play, in our case with these half-hour shows. So I love the theatrics of that. And when it's a live audience, there is a certain kind of romance that goes on with the audience and the actors they care about, the characters they care about, so that a laugh Carol O'Connor might be getting as Archie Bunker could be twice as long, 3 times as long, because the audience and his face were one. It was live. And I love that. That's why we're doing One Day at a Time the same way.
Yeah. And again, there just aren't enough of those anymore. What was great, too, tonight was hearing this audience laughing out loud to this and including that audience. So it was sort of a double experience. But again, there is something cool about this communal experience of watching a show and laughing together. And single camera shows are great, but we're kind of missing some of those. So what else? What else are you excited about? Anything else you can sort of talk about right now that you're up to at Act 3?
There are a couple of hundred things I could talk about. But what do you want to know? You want to? I broke a teacup the other day.
Getting very specific here.
One thing you should know is that this gentleman here is my partner, and we wouldn't be doing I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without him. So
Goes both ways.
Well, congratulations to the two of you. Can't wait to hear about the holiday special. So that's coming up, and then there'll be another one in the spring next year too. So a lot more to look forward to. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
And thank you, because we've done this before, and I was looking forward to it because I remembered how much I enjoyed it the last time. I appreciate you again.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you much, Schneider.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.